do this in terms of height, I can see, but. All right, let me get this out. Wow, I don't know where to start, but I know once I turn you guys on, I could just get out of the way because there's a lot of impassioned people on this panel here. But actually, why not just start with that last presentation? Because that was interesting, this notion that even attraction and gestural movement and all these things are part of this new nomenclature of metrics that we're thinking of when we talk about people interacting with media and brands in out-of-home spaces. And why not? We're talking about new measurement for a new medium. What do you guys think about some of that stuff? Oh, well, so before you do it, maybe you should do a little short intro because that's probably a good thing too, because I didn't give you the full explanation of what MBI is or Nielsen. I think some people may know what Nielsen is, MPQ, but if you don't mind doing a little opening about who you are. Well, no, you're going to answer that, so let's go that way.
Okay, sure. So we should start with a little intro. Okay, hi. Media Behavior Institute has launched a new syndicated product called USA Touchpoints that literally, in a sense, follows consumers around, but it's, you know, they report on their days. They report on a week, half hour by half hour through the entire waking day. They tell us where they are. So Macy's, for example, who they're with. Maybe they're shopping with their friends. What they're doing, they're shopping, all the media they consume, they were just touching a video screen, and their mood and emotion. So a lot of innovative possibilities, and just to actually extend my introduction by a second, to hook into the last speaker, you know, I think the most important thing, or one of the most important things said was the shopper leaves the beauty spot confident, right? So, you know, lots of us go shopping and we're anxious, we're nervous, am I gonna find something, will I get the right thing, will I buy the wrong thing? And if you can change the mood from anxious to confident, you've achieved a lot. And that's one of the things that we measure.
I'm Paul Lindstrom. I'm with Nielsen. I've actually been there for about 30 years. I've spent a lot of time designing research and methodologies for new media as they've rolled out and become ad-supported, and have been responsible for the measurements that we've done both on the cinema side and the place-based side. In terms of an intro and answering in terms of a little bit of a statement, I think that there are two things. One of which is, what we hear is that people are interested in value-based CPMs relative to other media. And that means inherently two things. There are two pieces to that equation, one of which is a sizing measure, which is imperative. The second is a value measure, which is really key. But the one thing I would stress that seems to get separated in the conversations that I'd hear this morning is that CPMs are a relative measure, meaning that sizing doesn't actually play into a CPM. It is inherently a value measure in terms of how people are looking at it relative to other media or relative to other networks. So that for people who are saying, we don't want CPMs, we want a value measure, inherently, that is what it is.
Leo.
Hi, Leo Kiviar from PQ Media. Some of you might know us from the digital out-of-home reports that we put out. Here's my advertisement. It's coming out in about 10 days. But we're also a custom media research firm, and we provide strategic intelligence to a lot of companies, including digital out-of-home companies, online companies, and major media companies, and trying to take a lot of the data that's put out and trying to make sense of it for planning ahead and business plans. The interesting thing I want to talk about in terms of the last presentation and the whole thing on interactivity, a lot of today's presentations have been about, well, how are we going to be measuring and being able to justify our media buys? Interactive screens, as you noticed, were not advertising based. That was all promotional, in store. So there are no ad dollars to be made by gas station TV with this interactivity or some of the other operations that are in here. So interactivity is great to give us some measurements, but it won't be helping to help come up with some of the value or the CPMs that we've been discussing.
Hi, I'm Tony Jarvis of Olympic Media Consultancy. We operate globally. We work with clients on the advertiser, agency, and media side, focused very often on data and making that data meaningful, accountable, auditable, and really making sure that the advertisers have what they need to make the very best decisions. And in fact, on today's panel, with your permission, particularly linking off what we heard from Tricia this morning, Adam at MediaCom, very similar thing. The position that I want to take today is the advertiser and the general media agency's planning perspective. But I think really when we come down to it, that's the perspective we need to take when it comes to data, the quality of that data, and what this industry, digital out-of-home, will need to move forward to gain share. Because the bottom line is, it starts with essentially the media planner. The media planner is in a media mix, 360-degree multi-channel environment. So if you don't have data that addresses not only the intramedia relationships, but also the intermedia relationships, and you have measurement X sitting out here, and TV's measuring something over here, you don't have comparable data, and I don't think you're going to get to square one when it comes to maybe attacking the television budget. The other thing I'm going to sort of cornerstone off is the opportunity that I think television and what they are doing offer this medium.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand your last point about television.
The point I'm making is that, you know, television, even if it's not the 800-pound gorilla, it's still the 600-pound gorilla. They're doing a lot of very interesting stuff above and beyond their basic measurement, which, whether we like it or not, C3 measurement in television, the network television measurement is a very, very good measurement. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. But I would suggest that until we as a digital out-of-home media get to a comparable measurement like C3, Internet has the 3M initiative. They are going not to impressions, they're going to viewable impressions. Until this medium gets there, this medium's in trouble, but also relating to television or the ancillary stuff. And again, is Doug, I don't know if Doug is still here. Fabulous stuff, Doug. What you are doing, and some of your colleagues are doing in the other media vendors, this medium needs a lot more of that to support and enhance what is, in fact, sorry, Paul, is a very crude measurement for this medium at this stage.
Okay, well, that's a great start. I don't even know where to pick up from that start, but I like what Paul said about, you know, that reducing to two parameters, you know, sizing and value. I kind of like what Leo said about the fact that, you know, the media as we've defined it don't include or factor in interactivity. And I just want to say one thing. That a lot of people think of digital out-of-home differently, and I think of it very broadly. So when I look at that kind of work that Possible did and some of the other examples, I think there's two kinds of digital out-of-home media we're talking about here. So maybe we should get it out of the way. There's one that is more like this traditional TV-based platform for buying impressions and in different locations. And then there's another one which is totally experiential and can be anything that people experience in public places. And Jim, I know you've done a lot of work in retail, and that's a whole different thing, you know, what people's mindsets are. But I just want to stick with that for 1 minute, because I think what we're talking about when we talk about interactivity or attraction is kind of like the word people used to use for television and advertising that was called engagement. And I know we're not allowed to use that word anymore, but isn't there a metric that goes above and beyond impressions or sizing and above and beyond value, which is cost versus return, you know? Isn't there something more ethereal? And, you know, I think what Doug's research was doing to a certain extent was talking about mindset and emotion and disposition. And aren't those really important attributes to have in the new measurement for this new medium?
Well, I'll let one of the others answer in just a minute, but I want to throw in, just so I'm not misinterpreted, that in fact, what I'm saying is exactly the kind of value propositions you're talking about are what I'm talking about, which is you need a sizing measure in order to go, is it bigger than a bread box? How do I have something, you know, otherwise you're buying a pig in a poke. I mean, anybody who'd buy anything and not know what you're getting, you know, is foolish, quite frankly. But once you have that, then it becomes a why me, and all of those stories, where does it fit into the story? Where does it fit into the journey that they were talking about with SpaFacts, or whether it's the ROI aspects of it or the experiential aspects? All of that is establishing the value for the person who's buying it in order to do it. So I don't want to go through and go, it's just a matter of where does it fit in with price. It is, you will pay the negotiated, you will negotiate that rate based on the value it's worth to you, which you can determine based upon these other types of measures, which should augment the sizing.
Yeah, so let me pick up on what Paul just said, because I think one way to simplify it is to say there are really three elements. There's cost. There's always cost. There's the sizing. There's how many eyeballs or how many brains. And I do want to point out, Tony, for your benefit, that in the DPAA's audience measurement guidelines, they do take into account notice. So it's kind of like the TAB's eyes on. It's a different method, same concept. And they
conceptually the same, executionally completely different.
Absolutely right. Appropriately different. So anyway, so it's not all that different from C3, but that's another discussion. But that's the kind of the eyeballs count. Then to the point of what are those eyeballs worth? Traditionally, we've always had one way to think about what the eyeballs are worth, and that's the target audience. Are those eyeballs of a likely car buyer? Are there eyeballs of someone who's likely to go to a QSR? But there are, for this medium in particular, we heard all about context today. And what's really important, I believe, for this medium is to measure the context of exposure. Is it just before they went shopping? Is it just before they made a brand decision? So that's kind of speaks to, Leo, you were talking about the opportunity to actually act on it. That's one way of defining value. Another way of defining value is the other side you were talking about, Joe, which is, are people in the right mindset? Are they bored and looking for diversion, so they're really interested in this message about a new movie coming out this weekend? Maybe they're not going to run off to it right now, but they're really open and receptive. And we know that's a way to really amplify the power of advertising. And I think this medium in particular, because it intercepts people in specific contexts in their daily life, is just a great way to play that strategy and find a role at the strategic planning level. Where you can provide unique value over and above just how many eyeballs are in front of the screen.
Okay, so I'm not sure really where to pick up from there, but let's try and dispense with at least one element. So let's like talk about sizing, because I don't think it's a big debate or a big discussion. I mean, there are various measurement systems in the market to deal with sizing and estimating, unless you guys think we should spend some time talking about that aspect of the business. But,
there are two very different measures in the multimedia marketplace, which go back to my planning perspective, I'm wrestling with.
Okay.
Some media measure gross impressions. Interesting, nice, but my client wants to know who is in front of the ad. That's about ad exposure, and there are some media that are measuring ad exposure. And I think all the ancillary data where we add context and if you were qualitative, are fabulous. But I believe that you have to add that to ad exposure measurement, not gross impression measurement.
Maybe I didn't say my question properly. I wasn't saying that there was a single method out there that accounted for all of the sizing. It's just like there's plenty of ways to measure how many people are in front of an out-of-home exposure. I mean, whether it's these gizmos or Paul's audits. But let's talk about it.
Paul
okay.
doesn't do an audit. Nielsen's done audit.
A compilation. Okay. Well, all right. Let's talk about sizing. So, what do we need to do to move the industry forward in terms of estimating audiences exposed to out-of-home locations?
Well, there are two things that I think are key to this, and one of which is, I've given loads of speeches. One of the first things I always say is, what we're doing is not the people meter, quite frankly. I mean, it's not to that same level of veracity, but the people meter is measuring a $70 billion business, and those types of levels are necessary and couldn't be afforded. And what we're doing is the best measure, quite frankly, light years ahead of anything else that's being done to size it. The biggest difference is even at the levels that we're talking about with the cruder measure, we hear the agency folks are going from various networks, oh, I can't afford to do it. And you're going, well, you can't afford to do it because you're continuing to buy without numbers, and I'm not sure how you do that. But I think that the sophistication of the measures will grow as we go on and can be supported within the marketplace. And the last piece with that is that we are not like the old Nielsen where we had to do it all. If we didn't invent it or we didn't produce it, we didn't look at it. We're working with each of the companies that are out there in order to find the best way to refine these measures, whether they're hardware folks like Intel or True Media, or working with touch points in order to get those types of lifestyles, et cetera. So I think that the measures will become more and more sophisticated. We're taking advantage of the data streams. And I think, if anything, the message should be, if you want more people measured, tell them they need to be measured. You know, you want us to buy? We're going to value you and support the people that will size it.
Yeah, and far be it for me to be a Nielsen apologist, but I think one of the great values you bring to market is that you become a denominator, you harmonize this across all these different venues and platforms. Let me ask Leo, because part of your role at PQ Media is you're also economist for the industry, and you help size the industry and you help forecast its growth. What do you think the industry needs in terms of a measurement apparatus, method, structure to move dollars forward?
What we hear from everyone in the industry, so I'm not just talking about digital out-of-home, is a common currency. And that's what needs to be done for it to be purchased. When we talked to some of our global opinion leader panel members, we had an instance where we had an agency person from the UK say, I hate buying in the US. Because in the UK, when somebody says, here it is, 1 month, everybody uses 1 month. I had an instance, the agency guy said, somebody came in, here's our impressions for the week. The next guy came in, here's our impressions for the day. Next person came in, here are our impressions for the month. There has to be that common currency working, as has already been said on this panel, between the agencies, the hardware, software, collectors, and the operators to say, this is what we need to do. And as an example, in Germany, the retail space is starting to take off because the 4 largest retail digital place-based networks got together. They weren't competitive and said, we've got to come up with a methodology that the agencies will accept. And they worked with the agencies. And spending in the retail market in Germany went up substantially when those 4 operators got together and said, not competitive. Let me add another thing in here. I got a call last week from a reporter at the NBC affiliate in Los Angeles. And she was doing a story about the upcoming James Bond film. And she said, you know what? He's not going to be drinking martinis this next time. Heineken just paid $45 million for a product placement in the upcoming James Bond film. So you can just see him when he finishes drinking. He'll slap it against his head and put it down. What measurement did they use to spend $45 million? And to put it into context with digital out-of-home, because we do the global perspective, I can count on both hands how many digital out-of-home companies make $45 million around the whole globe. There are only a handful. Okay? So they spent $45 million on just one product placement. Why did they do this? Is there a measurement firm in the product placement industry? No, there's ITVX out of New Rochelle that tries to say, well, here's how you do a good product placement by putting it in the front of the screen. But because Reese's Pieces went up a few years ago, and Red Bull went up because it was in a movie.
You're leaping into value now. Okay.
Pardon?
You're leaping from sizing into value now.
So that's what the whole value is that you need to have a measurement that's accepted as the currency that is worked together by the whole industry, regardless of whether it's Nielsen or if it's somebody else that incorporates the iDwell technology or something.
Okay.
I just want to pick up on one thing, Leo, you just said, which was the 4 biggest players got together. That's really, really important, I think, in this industry right now. One of the little case studies that we've done with USA Touchpoints is to look at what would happen if you put various digital out-of-home venues together. And in our data, it's not currency. We don't have Paul's data. We don't have the exact network audiences. But we do have pretty much all the venues in which digital out-of-home media appear. And as I think I said before, one of the analyses we often do is kind of what leads up to something. So what happens prior to the path to purchase, for example. So what did someone do in the hour before shopping? And it was very interesting that we found that if you put 4 different types of digital out-of-home networks together, they have a larger reach among shoppers in the hour before they go shopping than does live television. Radio was larger. Everything else was smaller. So, you know, as you scale these things and as you find the way to put them together, there's a stronger story. So I know that was only part of what you were saying, Leo, but, you know, when you think about the way, for example, Paul collects data, it's a network at a time, and while it's great, it's solid, it's comparable, and this and that, it's hard to put those pieces together, and it's also hard to put those pieces together and compare them to other media. So one of the things that we've been bringing to the party has been that broader consumer framework where you've got all the venues and all the media on one measurement platform where you can look at how they work together, look at how, for example, digital out-of-home complements television in terms of reach, other things of that sort.
If I could just one last thing, and that's, I do think what Jim's doing is a great complement to what we're doing. And I would add that so far we've actually measured about 30 networks. So 4 is nice in Germany. We're at 30, and it's pretty much covering already the vast majority of the large players. So we're in a good space right now on a sizing measure.
I'd like to echo what you said, Dr. Leo, because I think the industry in America is wrestling with the common currency issue, which is why I come back to the fact that some media are at gross impressions and some are at ad exposure. I would suggest to you that one of the reasons that Wayne Gretzky was a great hockey player was he was always trying to go where the puck was going to be. That was his greatness. I would suggest where the puck is going to be in terms of a basic common currency is an ad exposure measure, and I would suggest that digital out-of-home media must go there for a very basic reason, and it's a reason that actually you share with spot television. Spot television is measured so badly at the gross impression level, it is discounted heavily. You as sellers may not know that, but I tell you it's happening out there in the agencies. Traditional out-of-home on DECs was heavily discounted. And you don't want that. You want to be able to go in, whether you're the planner, the buyer, or the seller, that at least you're on the same playing field at a meaningful level, intra-media, across the digital out-of-home networks. But to your point, Dr. Leo, that it won't be discounted, and those values can be lined up directly with television, internet, radio, mobile, what have you.
So as long as we're pucking around, I don't know if you guys saw the panel I moderated just before this about the whole DSP concept, or if you saw Patrick Bonomo's discussion on Mike's planning panel earlier. But I think agencies are already starting to put together their own data management platforms based on actual users, of, out-of-home locations and tracking their data. And, that data will become more and more available, and I know you're all aware of these devices. And do you see at some point in time that this kind of proxy measurement becomes irrelevant when you know exactly where people are?
Well, I think you're still going to need the consumer framework, right? So that's kind of what we're banking on. You're still going to need to understand consumers from almost an ethnographic point of view. How do they spend their days? When do they buy things? When do they use products? And so forth. And then we need to think about how the media fit into their lives. So it's not so much about how the media fit into a media plan. Of course, ultimately, that's the goal of everyone in this room. But it's really important to understand how they fit into people's lives. One of the ways, that Touchpoints has been used in the UK for many, many years is as a hub. So if you have all of this information about consumers, you're then able to bring in all sorts of other measurement. And in the UK, literally all of the media currencies are fused onto the Touchpoints survey as a hub, so they can start with the consumer, understand the consumer opportunity, the insight that builds business, and then think about how you implement it through media, first at a planning level, and then with the granular level of a currency to take that down to the buying level. That's can I share a secret, Paul?
Yeah.
Okay, so just for you in this room, not to be spoken about, please. We're in the last little bits of planning a fusion where Paul's fourth screen data will be fused into the USA Touchpoints data, so that we'll have, as I mentioned earlier, all of the venues where digital place-based media appear, but we'll be able to also replicate the fourth screen audience levels for each network specifically. So it'll be a seamless set of data from the MRI data that we begin with to the Touchpoints data, the week-long diary that we collect, and into the fourth screen data. So that should help from the value perspective of understanding the value of each medium in terms of its ability to deliver a consumer either in the right receptive frame of mind or during the right life activities or on the way to shopping or eating or buying or whatever they may be doing, where it fits in their life, and then also be able to, within that context and that way of understanding the value, to actually have the currency level audience data.
So Leo, when you have something like that, with Nielsen measuring 40 critical mass players, I think like two of the biggest, like the cinema guys, are probably in there, and you have that kind of fusion with a really good, life stage and touch points type planning system where you can identify what type of people. Will that create the kind of infrastructure that could move the dollars into this business like they have in Europe?
It can if it stays consistent. One of the problems with, sorry to say this about the Nielsen, is that it's inconsistent of which networks have been counted one quarter versus the next quarter. So that consistency has to come into play. And the data has to be collected, quarterly, monthly, whatever, on a consistent basis. So, the cable industry grew because Nielsen as an aggregate said, here's what's happening with all the broadcast TV. People are watching less and people are watching more as an aggregate of cable networks, and more dollars have gone into that marketplace. Some of the things that we've heard already today is that one of the earlier speakers says, well, it's nice if I got digital out-of-home in my marketing mix. And Jack Sullivan was saying, well, what I need to buy, I can't buy because I can't do noon in one time zone and go to the, it's all about the need of the agencies who are doing the buying and having them accept it. So you even talked about, they're coming up with their own systems, but they're not even coming together as one. So IOTA has theirs, and Jack has his, and PosterScope has theirs, and OurView is another one that's out there. We have all of these that are just all mixes and matches that we're trying to combine.
I'll say that's my biggest frustration of covering this market is like, in most media I cover, there's a universe, a defined universe. In this medium, you can't even define what the medium is half the time. I mean, because it can be anything. Okay, so you're the default.
No, the only thing I wanted to actually answer your question, because I think it's key. I do think that all the technology you're talking about is going to play in. And we've been really working hard and struggling with how to convert transactions into audiences. And the type of information you're talking about, we're working with a credit card company, or a company that has got access to 90% of the credit and debit card transactions in the US, in order to be able to do, how do you tie into, what could be ROI measures, how do you tie into where they were at particular points in time, et cetera. So I mean, just as an overall answer, absolutely, I think more and more that'll be incorporated in.
I hate to agree with Paul, but absolutely, again, if we...
Just
at
this
least you're
once.
awake. Stay awake. If we take some of those leaves out of the television playbook, television has done some very interesting stuff in connecting the purchase data with the ad exposure data. There's two companies doing it. There's TRA that actually matches shopper data to set-top box data. And just fairly recently, actually Nielsen entered the same space. I don't know if there's a patent issue, but that's another issue. With Nielsen getting together with Catalina, where again they can link their television measurement data with actual purchase data. And that was very much one of the things I was talking about, that you need, but you've got to have the basic audience data first. These are wonderful and rich add-ons that will help you gain share or help give Christina at OMG a better position and an easier position, not having to monkey with so much data in terms of executing the buy once I give her the plan.
Paul, will you be able to integrate Nielsen Catalina solutions into your out-of-home database?
The one beauty of working for Nielsen, despite the fact they can be a big ugly gorilla at points in time, is that we've got access to a tremendous amount of databases. And so we have access to Catalina, we have access to the credit card types of things that we've talked about, and a whole variety going across the company, so that we're trying to look at the tools that are being made available for the other pieces of the video silo to go, how can we make that available here? So our whole goal is to see that light at the end of the tunnel, to make the tools consistent across. And you know, we're doing the best we can. Anything that's available to television, we're investigating to see what can be done. Along those lines, we had talked briefly a while ago, but I mention it if you don't mind, is that we're going to be incorporating, for example, cinema and place-based into ad views so that it will, we're working with the industry right now, and that will be happening probably by the end of this year, which we think is another significant step in terms of dimensioning where it fits in
So
the
there'll
video
be
portfolio.
This is terrible. That's very, very important what Paul just said, because if we come back to the planning perspective, a huge weakness for this medium and actually your sister media over on traditional out-of-home, the spend data, the campaign data that is reported by Nielsen and their competitor, Taylor Nelson Kantar, dreadful. So congratulations, I'm delighted to hear that Nielsen's getting on that. Hopefully Kantar will get on, so that as planners we have some the real detailed stuff. It's one of the first things we go to as planners. Who spent what in my band? I've got a brand. What's my brand competitive set? What did they spend? What were the GRPs? What were the dollars? Time, et cetera, et cetera. So good news.
We have time for audience questions if anybody has.
Can I add one thing here?
Yeah, I'm
before
sorry.
you put the questions. I think
The
a
lady
term
back
that
there,
you
though.
came up with is tools. I think technology is key in going forward on this. You know, the first ratings data was in radio in the 20s where people were flushing toilets and they were seeing in a particular city, did we see gains in that?
Wasn't that
Nielsen,
a joke? That was real, the flushometer?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
all right.
It
Toledo,
was.
Ohio.
Yeah, but even with Nielsen and television ratings, you know, when I used to teach college, it was, we don't know who's in front of the television. We just know the television is on, and they've taken it more and more into understanding who's exactly watching the television. And for digital out of home, it's really important because people do not go to your screens because of your content or your ads, except for cinema. We know that they're going to be there for a particular movie. I don't say, I'm going to gas station TV because they're going to have this particular show on at 12 noon. Okay, they just don't do that. So you need that technology that says, yes, here's how many people are there, here's how they're using it, and here's the POS that's going to be happening afterwards.
Okay.
Claire Marie from Poster Scope. I've heard from all of you really exciting things. I'm thrilled to know that we're going to have cinema and place-based and ad views. Tony, I'm with you on the impression has to be the same, whether it's an equivalent of an eyes-on impression or an opportunity to see. We keep talking about tools and all of these other metrics that have to come together, like rotation, social media, journey maps, clicks, interaction, cool factor. As a person who has to put it all together in the media mix, we're faced with some very basic needs. One, a universe. DMAs, add them all up, get a % of national to compete with any other media. Two, impressions that are equal across all media platforms. We need a way to convert you into GRPs. There's an argument whether it is or it isn't GRPs, but every person in this room has said, let's compete with television. Television, GRPs. If we want to compete on an out-of-home, digital out-of-home platform against every other media, we have to have common metrics similar. So in terms of the tools and the measurement, how can we get our arms around the metrics, the excitement, the cool factor of digital out-of-home and traditional out-of-home and put them together into the media mix on a common platform?
Well, just, okay, here we
Go ahead, Paul. Go ahead.
I'll lead into Jim probably, but I think that the answer is what we've done, and you know, I'm taking it as our audience data is by far the widest that's out there. So whether that's a currency or not, you can debate, but it's certainly the most prevalent that's out there, and it has been designed in order to be a consistent calculation with GRPs. We're expressing it as impressions because we don't have a universe that would really show things appropriately, but the data, despite what Tony would say, we've got differences in methodologies, but they were comparable, if not identical, in order to be able to evaluate within a GRP type measure. From there, you've got a relative sizing that can be a why me or why this particular media, where all these other value type equations can feed into it. So I think we're there. It's just a matter of what is going to get the traction. And while it might not be the be-all and end-all, it's the best we've got for right now, and it really does a good job.
And then what will happen next is by calibrating Paul's levels into the USA Touchpoints data, it will all be in the same database. So you'll have the same at a planning level. So our data is national. We're not going to look at DMAs. There's not enough sample size to do that. But at a national level, you'll be able to look at all of the networks that Paul is measuring consistently on the same metrics, within the same setting, against the same kind of consumer targets, and also compare them to all the other media, which are all measured on the same basis. So again, it kind of fuels a channel planning or a strategic planning level of insight. But as we fuse more and more data sets in, so assuming we go ahead and also bring in the Nielsen People Meter data, the Nielsen Online data, some other databases from other companies as well, you'll be able to kind of move across from one medium to another at a planning level and down into the buying level across a consistent set of data.
In the spirit of full disclosure, I should point out that Nielsen is a significant stakeholder in MBI.
That's true.
Okay. Yeah?
No, go ahead.
Oh, there's another question from
Can I
Sue?
just answer maybe Claire Marie's point? Would that be all right? Fabulous question. And in terms of the Wayne Gretzky's that are in you all, where we as a digital out-of-home arena need to be, I'd like to announce today that with key input from some of the very people in this room, and based on experience here in the US and globally, I have prepared a green paper outlining the process and action steps required to take this medium to the next level. It's currently in the hands of the DPAA, who are assessing the suggested process, the approach, funding mechanism, in expectation of then developing what's called a white paper that would then be distributed to the industry for input to help us embrace and get to the next level and achieve the very, very things that you've identified, Claire Marie.
Excellent. I'm Sue Danaher from the DPAA. And Jim, I have a question for you.
Sure.
And that is, I haven't heard any mention of GfK MRI, but I understand somehow they're tied into USA Touchpoints.
They're the other significant
Thank you, Sue. I probably should have explained that. In our study, we begin with MRI respondents. So this starts with a high-quality sample. It's all of their MRI data. Then those MRI respondents carry our USA Touchpoints diary, actually for 10 days. We use 7 of those, the best 7 of those days, and then it's ascribed up to the full MRI. So, when we talk about one solution kind of seamlessly, this looks like MRI with a lot more data that goes through the day in the life, a week in the life of consumers, half hour by half hour. As we ascribe the fourth screen data in, still it looks like one database. So you can go to Telmar, IMS, Point Logic, or Memory, and access what looks like a single data set, which in fact covers all of this territory without you having to kind of piece things together. Thank you, Sue.
In the spirit of further disclosure, GfK MRI is another significant stakeholder in MBI.
Thank you.
I think we're out of time, but I just want to make one last statement. Maybe it's a question if anybody has a quick response, which is, yeah, I love what all of you said, and I particularly love what you said about technology, Leo, but if I'm wrong, like 30 or 40% of US TV homes are still measured with paper diaries. Am I correct? I mean,
somewhere in that
And
neighborhood.
they're not accredited
and yet, and they're not even accredited by the MRC, and yet business continues to be conducted in that $60 billion industry. So if people want, they can use the metrics and make them better over time. But
Something I heard from everyone here was, TV, it's not the greatest in the world, and Maria, it's not the greatest. We're building something from the ground up. We might as well get it right from the beginning. It's as simple as that. You don't have a model that's broken, and and this is where the cooperation between all the key industry stakeholders is so important, to get it right.
that's a great closing point, and I promise next year we'll have a panel on how to get it right. So we have a coffee break now, so you can all think about it, or buttonhole these guys on how to get it right. Thank you. We'll be back here at